Things happen for a reason, folks, they really do. I get food poisoning, it means I have to delay writing the video for what happened after the Vegas Grand Prix, and then this happens. And, yeah, if you're a McLaren fan, yeah, makes sense why I'm actually starting with the losers now, just see whether or not you like it, because, this was timely. And this certain something broke relatively recently. Both Norris and Piastri have been disqualified from the race. Their P2 and P4 respectively wiped away from the classifications, and it now means Max is just under one DNF behind Lando, equaling Piastri in number of points, the count back saving the Australians vacant. But wait, Law, why? What exactly happened? Well, it's effectively the same reason of what happened with the double disqualification over in China for Ferrari. Excess plank wear with the skids, and it was all to do with the rear management, and based on what we have expected from McLaren going into this weekend, this kind of makes sense. Them most likely having to run the car lower to make up for the fact that this track is not kind to them, they do not do well on low grip circuits, and this is one of the lowest. But if you then happen to run the car lower than anybody else, then you just take a punt, and maybe that call for Lando to go and get Max might have been the thing that caused that excess wear, as in he went all out to try and go after him, but then ultimately finished 20 seconds behind him, so that didn't work out. And the documents are right here. The team claiming that they didn't mean for this excess wear to happen, them claiming that accidental damage may have led to movement to the floor, which could have caused additional wear, but the FIA were not too sympathetic. A numerical breach? Yeah, that's a slam dunk, mate. And this couldn't have come at a worse time. Vegas' initial result of P2 for Norris wasn't terrible, and meant that he had a comfortable lead still, so you could argue that he suffered more from this than Piastri did, who still has his 24-point gap to Norris instead of it being extended to 30 had the original result stood. Well, this has now thrown the championship back into play again with 58 points still available, and both Verstappen and Piastri 24 behind Lando. This is very much going to knock the psyche of the two McLaren drivers, because this was something not of their own doing. This was a team bungle, and they obviously apologise. They have no clue what happened. And you get the feeling that McLaren is actually realising its own hubris, with Zak Brown walking back all of his multiple comments saying, "Oh, Max Verstappen's a bruiser. Yeah, he's a bruiser. Yeah, he plays rough." And yeah, now he's not being so hot about that anymore, because clearly, I just think the drama with Max and Jos going, "Oh yeah, Oscar falling off, very bizarre, isn't it? I mean, he can't have just lost the skills to drive. I mean, very weird." But okay, aside from the disqualification, even their race results weren't quite as clean-cut as they would have ideally liked to be, especially for the fact that Lando started on pole and, well, look what we got. Lando's lunge into turn 1, that was just too much, on one of the shortest start straights on the calendar. He goes wide and both Max and George jump him by the time we get to the end of Sector 1. Certainly a dent in his recently consistent, powerful forms in the last few races, but no biggie, he was still ahead of Piastri, and he wasn't losing that many points from Verstappen. And it was a good thing that Piastri once again had a bad start, which saw him drop a couple of places, which meant Lando losing places, meant that he didn't really lose out too much. But yeah, we all kind of expected that based on what Norris was able to provide, that maybe one of them would get to the podium for the first time in McLaren's history over at Las Vegas, the new one. But instead we got this. This is very much becoming a certain situation where this is a cursed track for McLaren. Even when they have a second and fourth, it then gets taken away from them, because a double DNF, well, I mean, it's a double DSQ. And now we've effectively got Hamilton and Leclerc just giving them a sympathetic ear and saying, first time? Because this is not the first time that they've known about plank wear. That's happened to them twice. Incidentally, Piastri's plank was slightly more worn than Norris's, probably a setup thing to wield more grip, helped when he had his own gaff going into turn 12, and lost a place to Leclerc. Good thing his pit plan got him back ahead of him and within a few seconds of a podium, but now, it doesn't matter. Okay, we'll get back to the winners in a moment, but first I would like to share with you today's sponsor, Raycon, and their essential open-ear earbuds. These open-ear buds really help you stay connected to the world around you, as well as help you access your favourite podcasts, as well as incoming calls. Ideal for the kind of things that life throws at you, or things that make you go up ladders. And this Black Friday and Cyber Monday, you can save up to 30% on all Raycon audio products. As for these buds, they use an open-ear design, so you stay aware of traffic and chaos around you without stepping out of your immersive experience. The multi-angular lightweight ear hook keeps them comfortable and secure all day. Now, as we did last time, shake test! Yep, They're still in there, and I have awkwardly shaped ears, so that's saying something. They did not let me down. You also get multi-point connection, which means that you can jump from one device to another seamlessly. And you can get up to 36 hours of battery life between the buds themselves and the charging case. I've used Raycon earbuds for a while now, and they really help me wind down while I've been working all day up the ladder, as well as with scripting sessions. Their active noise cancelling really helping me tune out of the unwanted noise and help me tune in to the wanted noise. In my case, Apple Music's Spa playlist. Black Friday is around the corner, and Raycon audio products are up to 30% off site-wide. From everyday essentials to the latest releases, it's the perfect time to upgrade your sound or get ahead on gifting. These early deals won't last long, so shop now before they're gone. Just click the link in the description below or go to buyraycon.com/LawVS to secure yours. All on which to save on Raycon audio products site-wide. So thanks again for sponsoring the video, and the award for the scruffiest driver this time out goes to... yeah, Alex Albon. He wins that handily. The only driver to write off his car in qualifying, starting low down on the grid, and then his bally radio cuts out for the duration, meaning he's without contact with his pit wall. That being said, I recall him in qualifying said there was too much speaking. Maybe this is a case of, oh, be careful what you wish for. But in any case, this is yet another race where the Thai driver just couldn't hold a candle to what his Spanish teammate was able to do. He goes out in Q1, he does raise up a couple of places, it looked likely he might have squeaked another point, but then his tangle with Hamilton resulted in a 5-second time penalty, and then it ultimately led to his retirement on lap 35, so he didn't really get much time to try and do things, and then he rammed the back of Colapinto, which probably did even more damage to the front, so you think, this was not a clean weekend for Alex, not one bit. This was very much a low-ebb race, one which once again he did not score. And Sainz is getting closer in the championship. Then we got Aston Martin. You gotta feel sorry for Lance here especially. As I said in my quali video, Stroll had the potential of joining his teammate in Q3, but was a sacrificial lamb in regards to when to go on to Inters in Q2. Still though, P12 wasn't too bad. But then it crumbled after he got dinged by Gabriel Bortoleto, and that was the end of that. Granted though, it was pretty much going to be a minor miracle of Aston Martin scoring points in dry conditions. Fernando Alonso himself said that, and Lance Stroll kind of accepted this as well, that it was just a case of you got to get off the line and make sure you're not in traffic if you want to have a hope of P10 at best. And also, he was actually quite conciliatory regarding to Bortoleto, saying, yeah, no worries about Gabi, he's a good kid. I mean, this is all in this beef with Colapinto, as in like, oh, I like you, Gabby, I don't like you, Franco. Dad, get Franco out of here! Yeah, I mean, it's slightly condescending for Lance to call Gabi a good kid, but hey, at least there are no hard feelings, considering that this is, once again, a time when Stroll has had a DNF through nothing really directly his fault. So with that in mind, the team did lose out on points with Alonso, him starting 7th, he fell back to a net 11th. His race pace was nowhere near that P7 start. He slid backwards as the Haas pair and others got by, and he never really recovered after the lap 1 chaos around him. So for a veteran when things go south all around, this was a very disappointing time of it. And I think it was a collective disappointing moment with Lawson being taken out at the start. It was like oh man! Justifiably so, because he once again out-qualified Hadjar. He started P6, it looked like he might have had a chance of securing even higher positions, but then he got into a tangle with Piastri, which sent him packing, and then he had to pit, and then he was relegated to the back, ultimately finishing 14th. But fortunately for him, the stewards chose not to penalise him, this being a classic lap 1, turn 1 incident. Piastri didn't get anything towards him, and ultimately it was a case of, well, you've just got this, and you've now got to deal with it. Similar to Silverstone, really. And for a situation where his teammate hung in there to secure a valuable 12 points, and your chances of a podium were somewhat plausible, or at least another top 5, this was obviously a crushing blow. I would imagine that his odds of surviving into next year won't be dented too bad, since his descent to the bottom wasn't down to a performance issue, it was just down simply to the car giving out on him. But the same couldn't be said for Bortoleto. Yeah, this was not good at all. Not good at all. Not only did he take Stroll out and himself, but he wound up with no mercy for a lap 1 incident. He got his first 2 penalty points of the year, and a 5-place grid drop for Qatar. The Brazilian claiming that he had a good run on Albon and went for a dive, only to misjudge the braking point. Oops. To be fair, this is the continuation of a somewhat wobbly end to his debut season. You know, after having 2 DNFs in Brazil and now this is very much him completely falling across the finishing line, very much running on fumes. But yeah, you can easily chalk this up to being in the hard lessons folder. This was yet another hard lesson for him. Alpine had a hope for a chance at P10, with Gasly starting there, but he too was involved in the Bortoleto Stroll incident, and it saw him spin out and fall down the order. his car completely being wrecked at the back and thusly no chance of a single point. Him claiming that the car looked fairly decent in all conditions, his race over within a few hundred metres though. And the same could be said for the Franco Colapinto. After him being a little bit too cautious around Vegas qualifying, he got a decent start but then was rammed in the back by Alex Albon, meaning that his own diffuser was compromised, and it meant that really there wasn't much Alpine could do to try and make up the difference and maybe score a cheeky point with either driver. And even when the times were good, he was actually suffering from poor rear grip, so naturally this contact with Alex would have just made it even worse. So the team are basically just saying, well, we had a chance, but it was out of our control. We're probably just going to go to Qatar and hope we will have something tidy like we had last time out with Pierre Gasly in top 5. And now we get to the mess section. You might be thinking I'm being too fair to Tsunoda, and the results would reflect that, because qualifying was a disaster thanks to a tyre pressure error, which effectively ruined his session and left him on the back row. Then Red Bull chose to start him in the pit lane to sort the car. Laurent Mekies profusely apologising to Yuki once again for a breakdown in strategy, which meant he started lower than he would have hoped to or expected that he could. And then it didn't help that the timing of his various strategy calls around the virtual safety car weren't much cop either. It does very much seem that he is getting the raw end of the stick, and that, unfortunately, it seems that the overall perception is lost amongst the overall media. And even with the changes he brought in after qualifying, they didn't really do much to help him. Yuki very much aware that a lot of things are happening out of my control lately, but I can only control what I can control, with him noting that pace and confidence is slowly improving. But still, the team let him down again with a bad call. Do I think the media will sympathise though? Probably not. I actually recall one article recently that blamed Max's P16 start at Brazil on Yuki because they went with his setup going into Q1, and that's why Max crashed out. It was too much in terms of downforce. So naturally, the sentiment of that article was enough to fuel the fire that is burning in anti-Tsunoda sentiment. So all I can ask you is that just give this guy a break. I mean, the team principal Mekies is. Then there's Lewis Hamilton. You know what? I'll give him a break here too. He started 19th after Tsunoda's move to the pit lane. He did manage to clap back into the points after his worst non-mechanical starting place in his whole career. No wonder he calls this year his worst season ever. And the first stint was pretty strong as he sliced past the slower cars and dragged the Ferrari into the low end of the points. The real damage came in the second phase, where he pretty much hit his limit and remained behind Nico Hulkenberg yet again. This was not the first time this has happened this year. Then there was the clash with Albon, that didn't help, and Hamilton, not the one to blame this time around. It did therefore compromise his own performance at the very least, but still, he managed to, after the exclusion of the two McLarens, come away starting 19th and ultimately finishing 8th. So quite frankly, that's not the worst thing that could have happened. He still salvaged some points for the constructors' hopes of not finishing 4th, and that really does matter, and that this was a case of self-determination and just grinding all the way to at least somewhere in the top 10. It felt like a decent result after a really poor qualifying, but it very much met its limit. And when you consider his old team managed to get a double podium after the McLarens were removed from the results, the P8 of Hamilton feels like it was a serviceable one rather than a special one. But okay, now we get on to the winners, and I mean, quite frankly, Max Verstappen, he's the biggest winner out of all of this by far. Yes, this wasn't one of his wild comeback specials, it was the kind of calm, clinical execution that wins people titles. He read Norris's aggressive squeeze akin to Omni-Man and just went, please. He braked late, yet clean into turn 1, and he grabbed the lead because of it. From there, he controlled everything, as we've seen time and time again. It was looking quite spicy with George Russell in the beginning part of the stint, but we then found out that George Russell's car was ultimately compromised for steering issues, and he really did go ham on those tyres early on, so those two things together, yeah, it ultimately meant he fell back, and the rest of it was history. Max was very much destined to win this Grand Prix, and he did so by about 20 seconds over Lando Norris in P2. It became 23 seconds when Lando was ejected from the results. And it really helped that the longer run on the first stint allowed them to be a bit more flexible with the second one, meaning that he could at least manage more or push more. He had everything afforded to him with several seconds ahead of everyone else. And the communication with the pit wall, he said, was absolutely great. He had no complaints, and this is exactly what he said not that long ago, saying that Red Bull have to be perfect every single weekend if he has the hopes for a World Championship, the 5th one. Well, I would say this was pretty close to perfect, even though he did start P2. But then when you consider what happened, it did turn out for the best. And crucially, this win means that his title hopes are still very much alive. Then the double McLaren disqualification happened, and it's even better for him. With 58 points to play for and Max loving sprints, this is really game on again after Brazil and Mexico saw his prospects die a little bit. And yeah, that clash with George at the Spanish Grand Prix, that's going to be on the back of his mind even more now. And Mercedes, you know what? Despite the result looking clean on paper, they still leave Vegas with a 2nd and 3rd, but the detail when you look into it, is a little bit more interesting. George, yeah, he got on the first 2 rows in qualifying, and he managed to get around Norris and started in P2 come the second sector. And it looked really likely he was about to jump Max, but it became clear as time progressed that an ongoing steering issue came back, even though the Mercedes had claimed to completely change the whole thing, and it resulted in him really not having much of a leg to stand on. He started off strong in both stints against Verstappen, but it all quickly fell off again. So P2, that's not too bad after all things considered. It would have been a podium anyway. Because all of that opened the door for Norris to repass him, and him not really fighting Lando in that capacity with a duff car. And behind him, Kimi Antonelli delivered the standout drive, despite a time penalty for jumping the start. He then somehow coaxed those tyres all the way to the finish, managing the graining really well in the middle of the stint especially. And it ultimately meant that the time penalty that he got for jumping the start, it being frankly a rolling start, was, irrelevant. He only lost 1 place, that was being Piastri's, but when Piastri got disqualified, it meant that he therefore kept his P3, and that means he's had back-to-back podiums now, and this one at a street circuit, this is a real boost for his own career and his prospects in learning all of this stuff. Then there's Charles Leclerc. I would still call him a winner, but still, 2 tenths. 2 tenths away from inheriting 3rd. Must have felt gutting afterwards. Is Charles Leclerc walking away from Vegas annoyed with initially P6 on the timing screen? His performance, though, was a clear positive, because that pace of that Ferrari that he was wielding was actually pretty good in the opening stint, actually being toe-to-toe with the likes of Oscar Piastri, and him very much making the most of Piastri going deep into turn 12, down the long strip straight, and meaning that he was in a position where he could contend for the top 4 placements. And it got really close that my predictions were not all that far off, actually. The trouble is, though, is that the pit wall chose him to run a little bit longer on the tyre he already had, which meant that he lost the opportunity for an undercut, and it all completely fell off, with him falling back behind Piastri again, and it was all to do for him again. He tried to compensate with very deep braking, him being stuck in a big DRS train, yet there's only so much you can do when your car drags down the straights. His team boss admitting the error choice they made for overtaking was harder, which backs up Leclerc's feeling that he had given it everything from that car. So, I do think he belongs in the winners column here. Not because of the finishing position, but because the raw driving and racecraft are at a level that he really does deserve more. And Sainz, oh yeah, he deserves plaudits too. He might have lost 2 positions after qualifying 3rd, but losing them to a Mercedes and a Ferrari, that's not too bad. And quite frankly, this is one of the most valuable results that Williams got this season, that this is vindication after 2023, when times were not so good, and they had a double Q3 appearance, and they failed to capitalise on it. Now, just 2 years later, they got into the top 5 for the first time, and they got 10 very valuable points in securing their 5th place in the Constructors. I think it's very difficult for anyone else like Racing Bulls or Haas to try and catch up at this point, with 2 Grand Prix and a sprint to go. And yeah, even though Carlos gave it everything and he was great in qualifying, he just simply was outmatched by those around him. Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari, Red Bull, they were just all too much for him. And Sainz admitted that Williams were probably a bit conservative with their calls, just trying to secure a solid result, rather than maybe try something a bit risky with the faster cars. But still, 10 points, that'll do. Especially now he's not all that far behind Alex Albon in the championship standings, after having a really difficult start to the year. And the important thing is that this year's car looked like the quickest of the midfield over a full stint, which is exactly where Williams needs to be if they want to keep on their trend going into next year. And then there's Hadjar. You know what? Despite him having a podium to his name already, this was probably one of his best all-round performances in his F1 career so far. Because Racing Bulls arrived in Vegas without long-run data after messy practice sessions, as was the case for pretty much everybody else. So they were all kind of going into this with a bit of a question mark. And you know what? They got into Q3 with a really decent result with both guys in Q3, and even though Hadjar did finish behind Lawson, P6, he still was able to hold his own, and he managed to actually make up a couple of places and be a competitive little annoyance for the likes of Piastri and Leclerc. He also started in the right area of the pack, and he managed to avoid the Turn 1 chaos, and quite frankly, there was a lot of Turn 1 chaos, so that was an absolute boon for him. And then it was a case of not exactly full-blown tyre management, it was a case of just protecting the tyres a little bit. And then he reflected afterwards that he probably was a little bit too careful, but again, this is a really important time for Racing Bulls where they could stand to get 6th place in the Constructors. They need these points, and they lost a big chunk of them from Liam, so Isaac had to pick up the pieces. Even then, he spent much of the evening around the top 6, at one point hunting down Carlos for 4th, and the McLaren drivers, they had to really think about him. So 6 at the flag and a chunk of points. I thought 30 points would be good for his rookie year, but now he's reached 50. That's very nice. Now, Hulkenberg. After a run of poor qualifying form and his post-debut podium not bringing in a dawn of good results as expected, he now has once again scored, whilst his Brazilian teammate has fallen flat. Sauber choosing to put him on the hard tyre at the start of the race, and that actually turned out to be a little bit of a boon, which resulted in him climbing up the order and not really losing that much time with all of those old tyres. It was a lot more preserving than many people expected, and maybe some people would curse, that being Pirelli. He managed the early laps in traffic, and he managed to hold his own, so when time came for Lewis Hamilton to engage, it meant that the Sauber driver had plenty to work with, and he managed to keep out Hamilton by a good several seconds. From there, it was classic Hulkenberg. No drama, and he settled for what became 7th. Not close enough to challenge Hadjar, but enough to prevent Hamilton from passing. The team accepting that everyone who finished ahead had both started ahead and had more raw speed than them, which tells you that they have pretty much reached the top of this car's ceiling. And for Sauber, this was a really important time of it all because Aston Martin and Haas, they scored more than them. And speaking of Haas, they left Vegas feeling slightly disappointed with 11th and 12th, and when they woke up, they found both cars were in the points, 9th and 10th. All right, 3 points, cool. And because of limited running in FP2 in a wet qualifying session, it left them flying half blind. Yet the strategists managed to read the race well enough to commit both Ocon and Behrman to a one-stopper. Behrman, he got as high as 7th at one point I saw, but then eventually he did fall back to where he ultimately finished in 12th. Ocon though, all of those races where he had to basically go long, it's now paid dividends with him scoring more than Behrman. Yeah, 2 points to 1, but it's something. It's going to give the Frenchman some kind of crumb of comfort that the team does have his back. He then spent much of the race dueling with Hamilton for what would become P8, and he did come up short, but it was a nice little battle between the two Ferrari-powered drivers, I would say. And this result, thanks to the McLaren plank saga, means that they are now very much in play in securing P7 in the Constructors, after them now surpassing Aston Martin. And I now, sir, or madam, pass you over to this video right here, which I do think you will enjoy. I just need a glass of water. I'll be right with you.